Paul. This is the guy I met at breakfast time. By the way, I didn't tell you that when I was taking that long, hot walk around the convention center and he said, no, this is where we meet today, we found our room and we got there and no, there was no continental breakfast in our meeting room. That was supposed to be over in his hotel, in the conference hotel. So I ended up taking the hot walk after all. We got there and the folks at the registration desk said, oh no, you're on your own. It's in the restaurant. So Paul and I had breakfast together, enjoyed getting acquainted. He is the chairman of the Sister City Committee in Rochester, New York, with Veliki Novgorod, city in the north of Russia. This was an afternoon panel. I'm not going to mention names, but again, the blonde-haired woman is from the Moscow region. She was one of the main afternoon presenters, working with students and some innovative exchange ideas. And the other woman, the dark-haired woman to the right, is from the Russian Far Eastern University, which I'd never heard of, in Vladivostok, on the Pacific coast of Russia. And she spoke to us later about what they do with language. They were encouraging language students from all around the world, and Asian studies. There you can see how the simultaneous interpretation worked. The man with the mouthpiece, and by the way, you could never hear him, but he was speaking in a rather regular voice into that what would you say, well-insulated mouthpiece, and in both languages. He lives in Maryland. He's a former Russian who's now a U.S. citizen and does this as his full-time work, and told me that he has done simultaneous interpretation for some very important gatherings. By the way, let's look at that picture one more time. That's typical of our afternoon attendance. I mean, we were an elite group. So this is the presentation from the woman in Moscow region working with schools. She is holding her current, what she called a school yearbook. She said this was one of the practical things that has come out of doing exchanges with Americans in Santa Clara County, California, and other places, also in Pennsylvania. They saw that American schools had yearbooks that documented the student's life over the course of a school year and had everybody's picture, and they thought that was a wonderful idea, and now they do the same. Maybe words too small to see there. She had a PowerPoint show with a lot of good advice. There's her yearbook. The woman, the vice president of the Russian Far Eastern University. Then we had what for me was, I suppose, the least satisfying session, just because the technology was a little bit clunky. We had a Skype presentation by two people. The man on the left is an economist and expert on U.S.-Russia business. The woman on the right is chairs the Moscow-Russia Sister City Committee. The Moscow-Chicago. She lives in Chicago, businesswoman, former Russian citizen, now an American citizen, who has a successful business that started out, her main product is specialty dance shoes for ballet, because the best come from Russia and she knows how to source them and sell them. This is the man I was speaking of. Let's go forward to his business card, and I'll tell you his name because I've forgotten. It is Oleg Borisovich Ivanov. You see, I can read a little bit of Russian, and his business card tells me he was representing the government of the Moscow region, which you see in smaller letters under his name, but this tells that he is president of the Center for Resolution of Social Conflict. A topic I'm very interested in, and I consider myself to have worked in the same field And so, such as we could with an interpreter, we chatted a little bit about that. And I have shared this information with some others in the conflict resolution field, was very excited by his presentation, which seemed to me to be spot on in terms of values and principles and practices of conflict resolution and making friends of enemies, or at least reducing misunderstanding that leads to conflict. So we stuck it out through the afternoon. This speaker was from the other side of that relationship with the Moscow region, this woman from Santa Clara, California, an educator and Sister Cities person telling about their work with Moscow. Lauren Poe is the mayor of Gainesville, Florida, which is Steve Kalishman's hometown, where Steve is the Sister City chairman. Wasn't it convenient for him to arrange for his own mayor to be a speaker to us? This man told a wonderful story about one of his predecessor mayors who was, as he described him, conservative, hawkish, if those are the right terms to use, very suspicious of a relationship with Russia, and yet he went on a delegation to the first or maybe the second delegation from Gainesville to Novorossiysk and made friends. And when some people in their hometown were angry at something that was happening in Russia at the time and wanted to bail out of this relationship, wanted their city council to say, we're not going to do it anymore, it's going to be our way of punishing the Russians or showing them that we're displeased, it was that former mayor, that so-called conservative hawk, who spoke up and said, we know those people and they're our friends. We don't fight with our friends. We find ways to get along. And Steve Kalishman brought up the end of the day, summarizing what we'd heard, challenging us that small as we are, we should carry on, stay the course, rebuild. And then it was time to dress up for the evening. Again, it was dress up time. I'm telling you, the heat index was 110. There I am sweating through my second long sleeve shirt of the trip, and back in my room getting ready to go out to dinner. Of course, we wore jackets and ties. We took a motor coach, rather long ride, I can't even tell you what direction we went, to the Military Aviation Museum, because you know Virginia Beach is near Norfolk, Hampton Roads, that area, which has a huge military presence, and this actually was a private museum. We walked in the door and saw aircraft mounted overhead, and were greeted by this string quartet as we walked in. Air-conditioned, lovely place. With aircraft everywhere. Crowd's getting bigger because our pre-conference focused on Russia was coming to an end, and more folks were arriving, many more folks for the 61st Annual Conference of Sister Cities International. And again, here's the couple that I liked so much. And the other woman there is from Durham, or Raleigh and Durham, North Carolina, and is reviving a long-standing Russia relationship there. At our dinner table, she asked if we didn't think it was a little bit ironic to be having a conference on peace and understanding in the midst of so much military presence and military technology. We agreed it was ironic. That supposedly, according to the private collector who built this museum, he says that is the Red Baron's aircraft from World War I. What can I tell you? It was red. There he is. He got up and told us a little bit about his museum, actually told us a lot about his museum, and then Sister Cities International presented him with an award. And I had a good night's sleep and got on a plane early the next morning to hurry home and try to figure out what it all means and whether it's worth doing any more. And I'm going to end here with a few slides showing that I feel like I've been through all this before. There's the announcement of a conference, a U.S.-Russia conference, actually U.S. and Commonwealth of Independent States, to be held in Moscow in the spring of 1994. They were claiming about 150 relationships at that time, and they were saying we should all come. We did. And when I got home, I went in the basement and I found my conference packet, which I suppose I had not looked at since 1994. There's the delegation from Muscatine, Iowa, Honorable Jeanette Phillips, mayor of our city, Vernon Ohlendorf, Muscatine Community College professor and vice president of Muscatine Sister Cities, Linda Green, who was assistant director at Muscatine Arts Center, and me as chair of the Kislovodsk Sister Cities Committee. There's our mayor, Jeanette, with a deputy mayor on one side and let's call him a citizen activist, Sasha Shaksuvarov, on the other side. Sasha's been here a number of times. In the late Soviet days, both of these guys came up through the Young Pioneers and the Komsomol youth to be young, new, energetic members of the Communist Party, and their careers turned out different ways. But it didn't stop them from being ambitious or finding their ways to power. There are some more of us, and actually there are some folks from Grinnell there who also attended the conference in Moscow, and then they were down and visiting Zheleznovodsk, which is near Kislovodsk, their sister city, and we were all together at one point. Some people may remember when this mayor of Kislovodsk visited Muscatine in 1992, he walked in our 4th of July parade with Mayor John Keg, Vasily Kuzmich Tovkan. And there he is, 4th of July parade 1992 with John Keg. And we had just painted the Russian flag onto the new Russian flag onto our banner. Probably can't read this one, but this is the telex. We didn't have Facebook, we didn't have easy email, we were barely using faxes in those days, and this is the telex from Muscatine resident Mike Montandon, who worked in the consular service in Moscow and was an incredibly useful go-between during the early days of our relationship. Here he's informing us that the mayor of Kislovodsk will be able to come to Muscatine. Now, this is from the brochure for the Vasily Tovkan was the head of what they call a sanatorium, a health resort in Kislovodsk, and so that's from his brochure. That's from the brochure too, but I have taken the cure, and that's one of the stories we can tell some other time. This gentleman was a World War II veteran who struck up a pen pal relationship with Ralph Jackson of Muscatine, who was also a World War II veteran and active on our Sister Cities Board of Directors. Ralph was one of the first travelers to Kislovodsk and had met this man. Mr. Barulin and his son Alexander, Sasha, ended up studying at Muscatine High School. We'll keep going. Whoops. I just wanted to point out that we've traded some children of city officials in both directions. That's Patrick Gray, who traveled with us in, in the early 90s, standing in front of the Russian White House in Moscow. If you remember Boris Yeltsin on the tank waving the flag and saving the day during the coup against Gorbachev, that's where it happened. The young woman on the left as we face the screen is Mary or Masha Beketova, the young daughter of the mayor who signed our sister city agreement, Viktor Beketov, her friend Liana Osipova on the right. And there is Viktor Beketov and his wife with me in one of my first trips to Kislovodsk. He wasn't the mayor anymore. He and I are exactly the same age. And he explained to me that, yes, he was an energetic young communist, He wasn't a communist in the sense that we used to think of as those bad guys. He was just an ambitious young man who wanted to do the best for his city, and he became the mayor. And naturally, he's not the mayor anymore because he was the old communist mayor then. But someday, he's going to be elected democratically. He swore that to me. And sure enough, that was about 1995, 96. There is the campaign brochure that Viktor Beketov was a candidate for mayor. And he was elected again, and he served for a while, and there he is in a city brochure welcoming us to his city. The last time I visited Kislovodsk was with a Muscatine delegation in summer of 1998, and Viktor was the mayor again, 9 years after signing our sister city agreement, and we were able to meet. That's a deputy mayor from the time, and I'm sorry I've forgotten the name. I put his picture in because he has led a delegation to Muscatine. Our group in 1998 met at City Hall with some city officials, and in this group is Natalia Lutsenko, who came to Muscatine as a deputy mayor, and later she served for many years as the mayor of Kislovodsk. There she is presenting me with a painting of Mount Elbrus that I talked about, which now hangs, I believe it still hangs, in our city hall. The man in the picture is Alexander Krasnorutsky, who was a deputy mayor, and he was in the very first delegation that visited Muscatine in 1989, or maybe it was spring 1990. There's Natalia on the left when she visited Muscatine as a deputy mayor in 1995. We'll wrap it up here. Alexander Krasnorutsky was a good guy. Met him in the 1980s, saw him repeatedly in the 90s, and then he died unexpectedly. I thought he was young and fit, but we lost him too soon. And there he's saying goodbye to me the last time I was in Kislovodsk. And there's an invitation letter signed by Alexander in 2002, inviting our mayor, Dick O'Brien, to lead a delegation from Muscatine. So, as I say, this is just preamble to at least one more show about our Kislovodsk relationship, and I leave you with the question, what do we get out of having a relationship with Russia? Is that ancient history that we can celebrate and say, well, we helped end the Cold War? Or should we see it as a long-term relationship that the world needs, good times and bad, between Iowa and Russia, no matter what's going on in the world, no matter what's going on in our local city governments? The people come and go, but the relationship remains. Thank you for your interest. Thank you for listening. Tune in again soon because we've had a lot of travelers this summer and we have more shows coming. Again, I'm Dan Clark for Muscatine Sister Cities.